Welcome to this short introduction of SPICE and in particular to Automotive SPICE. The goal of this presentation is to give you a quick start guide for understanding what it is about, what is the motivation for using it, and how it is typically used in industry. Whether you're an engineer, a designer, a quality assurance engineer, or just someone who's really into cars, we want to help you understand the core ideas. We're going to pull out the essential insights so you can get the big picture without getting lost in the details. Our guest today is Jürgen, Principal Consultant and one of the Managing Directors of Process Fellows. Today, he is my discussion partner for all questions concerning Automotive SPICE. So, Jürgen, here's my first question. What exactly is SPICE?
Welcome everybody from my side as well. Coming to your question, what exactly is SPICE? Well, at its core, SPICE is an international standard, part of the ISO 30000 family of standards. And it's really all about assessing and improving processes. On the one hand, you want to know for yourself how you can improve your business processes. This presupposes that you know where you stand. This is a topic of process capability determination, as well known as assessment. Then, when you know what is going well or maybe not so well, you want to improve it. And that's the topic of process improvement. These two topics are addressed with SPICE, and you can apply this internally in your own company. But now let's assume you have a supplier who develops for you, or you don't have a supplier yet and want to look for and select one. SPICE is also used very successfully in the industry for supplier management. The reason for this is that you also want to select suppliers who ultimately know what they are doing, that they do it well, because only then can the quality of what is developed and supplied be okay.
Okay, I understand. That is SPICE. But what about the other term, Automotive SPICE? What is the difference, or is there a difference at all?
I mean, SPICE originated in software development, but these days it exists across a wide range of industries and domains. And to answer your question in short, Automotive SPICE is a specifically tailored variant for the car industry. However, the Automotive SPICE is probably the most popular and therefore most important SPICE variant today. It's the state of the art in the development of software-based systems in the automotive industry. Especially within the automotive world, safety and quality are absolutely paramount, and that's why Automotive SPICE is super important. Of course, in this domain, it's not only Automotive SPICE. There are lots of other standards as well. So for example, the ISO 26262, ISO 21434, and many more. However, if you implement Automotive SPICE first, this can often be considered helpful and as a foundation for implementing more specialized quality models.
I get an idea about this. You mentioned earlier that SPICE is used internally or as well externally for supplier management. Does this mean the car manufacturers are requiring Automotive SPICE to be implemented by all suppliers?
Basically, yes. How strictly the implementation of Automotive SPICE is checked by the car manufacturer depends somewhat on the manufacturer itself. There are certainly differences between manufacturers as to whether they check compliance themselves with the help of assessments. The so-called target levels and the so-called process scope can also vary between the manufacturers. Some car manufacturers even go one step further and have their own additional requirements as how to implement Automotive SPICE. But again, the short answer is yes, car manufacturers demand this standard because they know from their experience that good development processes are conducive to good product quality. And as already mentioned, this is essential in a safety relevant environment. It's also essential from a cost perspective because just imagine if 1 million or even more vehicles have to be recalled due to a fault. That's definitely something to avoid, and you do not want to pay for this. Instead, it's better to pay for process improvement.
And what does this mean for the supplier of the supplier?
It's not only the car manufacturer that demands this from its tier 1 supplier. Quality must be, of course, be engineered throughout the entire supply chain. Otherwise, this would not be a particular sustainable implementation of the topic quality.
Thanks for this insight so far. On your slide, there are few terms we should briefly explain. For example, this presentation breaks down the acronym SPICE to Systems Process Improvement and Capability Determination. So let's start with process. What exactly do we mean by process in this context?
If it's about processes, we will think of it as a structured set of activities, a way of doing things. It's the roadmap that an organization uses to develop and maintain its products or systems. And in the case of Automotive SPICE, it's all about how you go from an idea for a car system, respectively a component inside the car, to the actual product.
The second term about SPICE is the term improvement. I mean, this seems self-explanatory, right? It's about making things better.
Well, it is and it is not. I mean, it's about making those processes better, but it's also about creating a culture of continuous improvement. And this is maybe most important here. It's about where you are constantly looking for ways to refine and enhance how you are doing things.
So it's not just a one-time thing, it's an ongoing process. And then finally, capability determination. What that's all about.
Well, determination is about figuring out how good your processes actually are. Can they consistently deliver the intended results? And if so, to what extent? It's about assessing and measuring the effectiveness of your processes so you can understand your strengths and weaknesses, and then focus your improvement efforts where they are needed most.
Hey, Jürgen, you were already talking a bit about advantages if Automotive SPICE is implemented. Can you please summarize the most important benefits for us?
Certainly, as already mentioned, defects that are contained in the products sold very often do not only cost once, but must be corrected in all products sold. Sure, there are over-the-air updates that make many things easier. Nevertheless, when defects are discovered late, they are usually exorbitantly more expensive than when they are discovered early in the development cycle, or in the best case, are not made at all. By the way, bugs are not fundamentally bad. I just have to learn from them, and I have to discover them as early as possible to reduce the impact and to avoid costs. A structured development process that gives me quality gates and that systematically checks that I have carried out all the necessary activities and have not forgotten anything, this certainly helps here. And that is precisely the idea behind Automotive SPICE, namely to improve processes so that development, for example, runs well and in a structured manner.
Understood.
Product development is becoming increasingly complex. In fact, there are multiple dimensions in which complexity is rising. First, let's briefly look at product complexity. Products have more and more features. Of course, a company wants to differentiate itself from its competitors through better features, through more features. The user is supposed to receive maximum value. If I can offer more and better features, I can also charge a higher price for my product. But higher product complexity not only means more effort in development, it also logically leads to increased effort in testing. And now comes another aspect of complexity. More effort usually means I need a larger project team. But where do I get the development capacity from? Almost inevitable, this leads to larger teams, distributed teams, and a greater number of suppliers. And all these people must work together in a systematic and coordinated way. It's obvious where this is heading, towards increased complexity in project organization, processes, and tool landscapes. And that brings us right back to Automotive SPICE, which helps establish systematic and structured process landscapes.
That sounds logical, but not easy to implement.
You are certainly right about that. But that's why we process fellows are here to help. Car manufacturers and their suppliers must develop according to the state of the art for product liability reasons. And of course, stakeholder requirements must ultimately be met. Systematic system and software engineering based on Automotive SPICE helps to meet the required product and process requirements. Without continuous improvement and a systematically structured approach, we lose time in development. As the saying goes, the wheel is always being reinvented. Instead, Repetitive tasks and work results should be standardized in order to be more efficient. This is also one of the ideas behind Automotive SPICE.
Let's move on. Now, this ASPICE Quickstart guide talks about different levels of abstraction. There's standards, standard process, and project. Okay, which are kind of framed as the what, the how, and the doing. So let's start with the what. This means the standards and specifically SPICE itself. What's important to understand at this level?
At the standards level, we are basically talking about the requirements for processes. It's like what needs to be done, why is it important, and how do different parts of the development process relate to each other. It's kind of like the rule book. It sets the foundation for everything else.
Now we move on to the how. What does that involve?
So, the how level, that's where things get more concrete. It's where an organization takes those requirements from the standards and creates its own specific way of working. Here's how we are doing things. And this includes stuff like life cycle models, like do they use a waterfall approach or an agile approach? And then there's workflows, roles, responsibilities, the skills that are needed. Reusable templates for the efficient elaboration of work results, checklist, all that kind of stuff. So it's like taking the rulebook and making it work in real life in an efficient and effective way. For these first two levels, the what and the how level, I also like to draw a comparison to product development. First, we describe what product features are needed. The technical solution, the how, comes later in the form of the product architecture. It's somewhat similar in this illustration. The model tells us what we need to do, the process requirements. The how, the solution, is then our own process architecture and process landscape developed in our company.
Okay, and then finally, the doing, the project level. This is where the rubber meets the road, if you want to say so.
This is where all that planning and preparation actually gets put into action. It's where the standard processes are tailored to the specific needs of a particular project, and then, are executed. Let's have a look on the next slide. This gives us a specific example. The slide shows a so-called best practice of system requirements analysis. This best practice specifies what do we have to do if it's about system requirements analysis. On the how level, workflows are defined, including tasks with inputs and outputs and responsibilities. And on the doing level, the project team uses a specific requirements management tool where the requirements are actually managed.
Thanks, very good example. But which processes are actually included in Automotive SPICE? I think you call this process dimension, right?
Yes, you are absolutely right. In Automotive SPICE, we are talking about two dimensions. The process dimension contains all the defined processes with their base practices. Actually, this dimension contains even more details than just base practice, but for now, let's keep it simple. As you can see, Automotive SPICE is structured by several process categories. That are the different colors highlighting different lifecycle process categories. Within these process categories, we can see again several process groups. Again, just to keep it simple, you can identify here easily engineering processes like systems engineering and software engineering. For the latest ASPICE version 4.0, the authors added hardware engineering and machine learning engineering processes. In addition, there are supporting processes like quality assurance and configuration management. Of course, within projects, we need project and risk management. In case of suppliers, we need supplier monitoring. I did not mention all of the processes, but this slide gives you the complete overview of them.
Now, a really key concept in SPICE is process capability. What exactly did that tell us?
So, this is actually the second dimension, the so-called capability dimension. It's all about, how good is the process at consistently achieving its goals? How effective is it? And we use this NPLF rating scheme. Not achieved, partially achieved, largely achieved, and fully achieved. And each of those has a corresponding percentage range to give you a more precise measurement.
So it's a way of quantifying how well a process is performed, managed, defined, improved, and so on. And that links to the Automotive SPICE capability levels, which, by the way, go from 0 to 5. How do those levels relate to each other?
So think of these levels as representing increasing maturity. On level 1, this fits basically to achieve defined process outcomes by performing those so-called base practices. On higher capability levels, topics are addressed like managing process implementation, managing work products, process standardization and improvement, and even further topics. Let's go for a more concrete example. Level 2 addresses, for example, managing process performance management. This term, process performance management, may sound very theoretical at first, but actually it's quite simple. Now we are talking about a process that's being planned, monitored, and controlled. You have got defined roles, responsibilities, and resources. So basically, it's applying project management for a given process. That's it. So easy. Okay, easy from a theoretical standpoint. From practical standpoint, you might face resource issues, missing alignment with important people involved, unclear expectations, and maybe many more. You should have a look on the right side of this slide. Setting up a learning organization means we start with some reasonable processes defined on organizational level. We adjust them. This means we tailor them to the needs of the project, and we implement them within the concrete given project. But this is not yet learning. We have to collect feedback from process implementation. We use this feedback to improve our standard way of working, which means the standard processes. And now we have a learning cycle, and that's it again, a simple idea, quite logical and easy explainable approach from theoretical standpoint, often not so easy to implement from a practical point of view.
As a summary, going along this so-called capability dimension, it is a bit like climbing a ladder of process excellence. Each level builds on the previous one, adding more structure and sophistication. In ASPICE, there is sometimes the term assessment indicator used. What are those assessment indicators?
So assessment indicators are the specific criteria that are used to evaluate process capability. We can simply call them practices. Actually, ASPICE differentiate between base practice for level 1 and so-called generic practice on higher levels.
And how does an assessment and its result look like?
So, from a process perspective, an assessor is basically doing interviews with project team members, reading through the doing, if you want to say so. We look into the documentation, into tools, we ask questions, how such tools are being used. In addition, we often look into the process landscape. Remember, that's the how, like we explained it earlier. How much we are looking into this process landscape depends a bit on target level of the assessment. For example, in case of a level 3 assessment, this how level is much more important than in case of a level 2 assessment. The questionnaire for all these interviews, that's a base practice and generic practice. Again, that's a bit simplified, but that's how in the end it works. And then we derive the results. The assessment gonna highlight specific areas where processes are weaker than expected. And those weaknesses become the basis for defining concrete action items, both at the organizational level and the project level. So, for example, if the assessment reveals a weakness in how requirements are analyzed, the organization might define clearer criteria for performing such an analysis and make that part of their standard process. And then at the project level, you would make sure that the requirements analysis for that specific project is done according to those new requirements.
Now, for anyone who might be facing an Automotive SPICE assessment, what are some key things they should do to prepare?
Preparation is crucial. First, you need to be crystal clear about the scope of the assessment. You know what's being assessed. Everyone needs to be on the same page. Second, it's helpful to have a solid understanding of the Automotive SPICE model itself. You know the requirements, the expectations. And third, make sure all your documentation is up to date. By the way, you should not update your documentation because of the assessment. Of course, your project documentation is always up to date, right? Doing a gap analysis before going into the official assessment is helpful too. First, you have the chance to identify gaps and to close them. Second, the project team gets familiar with the way of questions are phrased in such assessments. And this also helps your team feel more confident prepared for the interviews. Some project teams elaborate a so-called help sheet. They basically are doing a compliance mapping between the project documentation and the practices within Automotive SPICE. However, although you did a great job in preparing yourself for the assessment, there might be some gaps. This can happen. Be open for a honest discussion. Use this potential gap as a chance for improvement. Maybe you have identified the gap yourself while doing the preparation for the assessment, but you just did not have the time to close the gap. Then just show the gap, show the defined action item, respectively your plan, how you want to close it. And this is something an assessor really wants to see, that you are able to identify gaps even yourself, that you systematically tackle and close such gaps. That's the idea of continuous improvement.
Thanks a lot for discussing Automotive SPICE with us.
If you want to have a more detailed look on it, you can now use our website spiceforecast.com. Here you find all the detailed definitions of the Automotive SPICE practices and even more. We added as well further SPICE models which are relevant for the automotive industry. Check out our intro video to spiceforecast.com explaining how to use the website. It's not just another electronic pocket guide, but it gives you additional learning and knowledge nuggets to your fingertips.
Have a great day. Thanks for following our discussions on Automotive SPICE. If you have further questions, do not hesitate to contact us at Process Fellows.
You are the pioneers. With your visions, your ideas, and your passion to make things better. And we are the ones who protect you from pitfalls. We are by your side whenever needed as a true fellow. Reliable, pragmatic, realistic. Together we make your product come alive. Imagine you enjoy improvement. Process Fellows.